Happy Valentine's Day, everyone! And yes, I have another Shakespeare play for us to look at. The Winter's Tale! The Winter's Tale is another Shakespeare comedy, but it starts out sounding like a tragedy. Scholars consider this play one of the later romances that Shakespeare wrote. It is considered one of Shakespeare's problem plays, which means it has a more ambiguous tone instead of a straightforward one. It's basically a fusion of a comedy and a tragedy. The story begins with some people talking about the king of Sicilia, Leontes, and the king of Bohemia, Polixenes, and how they're the bestest friends ever. Now, Sicilia is actually Sicily, but I'm going to call it Sicilia since that's how it's referred to in the play. Anyways, Polixenes is in town and has been for many months. He really wants to go home now and check up on his son Florizel and take care of his kingdom. Leontes really wants Polixenes to stay, but is unable to convince him, so Leontes gets his wife Hermione to convince him, and she does successfully. Now, Leontes is sitting there like, how the frick did she get him to stay so easily? And begins to suspect that the two are having an affair, which makes him angry. Now, Hermione is also pregnant, which leads to Leontes to also believe that her child is actually Polixenes's. Now, Leontes asks a Sicilian lord named Camillo to murder Polixenes, but he can't do it, and instead tells Polixenes to flee back to Bohemia. Camillo goes with Polixenes to Bohemia since he knows that if he stays, Leontes will likely kill him. Leontes is not too pleased about this news, and publicly accuses his wife of infidelity. He throws her in prison when literally everyone else is telling him not to. Leontes sends two of his lords to go speak with the oracle at Delphos to confirm his suspicions. Well, the queen gives birth to a girl, and her friend Paulina, believing that Leontes will surely change his mind once he sees his new daughter, goes to show him. Leontes, of course, is not happy at all. At first, he orders the child to be burned, but since literally everyone else is telling him not to, he decides to send Paulina's husband Antigonus to take the child and abandon it in a desolate place. During Hermione's trial, the lords come back with news from Delphos and say that the oracle says that Hermione and Polixenes are innocent, Camillo is an honest man, and Leontes will not have an heir until his lost daughter is found. Leontes refuses to believe the oracle is right, but right at that moment, he receives word that his son Mamilius has died of sickness. Right then, Hermione falls in a swoon and is carried away by Paulina. Paulina comes back a few minutes later and says that the queen has died. Well, Leontes is now feeling some regret. And if this were a tragedy, the play would end here, but it doesn't. See, Antigonus has taken the child to Bohemia and leaves her there, claiming that Hermione appeared to him in a dream and told him to name the child Perdita. He leaves a bundle by the baby that contains gold and other stuff that shows the baby is of noble blood. Now, Antigonus's ship is wrecked and he wants to take pity on the child, but is chased away and mauled by a bear, which gave us the Shakespeare's famous stage direction, exit pursued by a bear. Now let me stop right there for a moment for a brief history lesson. Back in Shakespeare's day, one of the many ways to entertain people was an activity called bear baiting. Basically what it is the people pit a bear against several dogs or other animals and watch them fight to the death. People would bet on which one would win or lose. Anyways, I bring this up because while yes, it is funny to imagine someone in a bear outfit chasing off one of the actors on the stage, as it would be done nowadays, but some scholars believe that back then they may have used an actual bear since they knew how to catch one and how to contain it. Anyways, back to the story. Baby Perdita is found by a shepherd and his son, which in some versions of the story is just called Clown. Why? I don't know. So the shepherd raises Perdita as his own daughter. Now, right about here, time comes in and explains that it's been 16 years since all of these events took place, and Perdita is now a young woman who has caught the eye of the young prince of Bohemia, Florizel. Camillo is begging Polixenes to let him go back to Sicilia, since he hasn't been home in so long and has likely heard news that Leontes won't have him beheaded for coming back. Polixenes doesn't want Camillo to leave yet, since he has a problem. Florizel has fallen in love with a shepherd girl, and has been constantly visiting her in disguise. So Polixenes and Camillo go to a sheep-shearing festival in disguise. At this festival, Florizel and Perdita announce their betrothal. Now, before I get to the good stuff, I want to mention something that will be important later. There's a man named Autolycus who once served Florizel but is now a common thief. He actually pickpockets the shepherd's son and then at the festival in disguise tells various tales and songs for entertainment. He'll come back in a minute, just keep him in mind. Never mind. Alright, after Perdita and Florizel announce their betrothal, Polixenes intervenes and reveals himself, saying he doesn't want Florizel to see Perdita ever again. However, Camillo really, really wants to go back home to Sicilia, so he helps Perdita and Florizel escape to Sicilia, and they run into Autolycus on the way out and use his clothes to disguise themselves. The shepherd and his son are out searching for Perdita and Florizel, and they are pointed in the direction of Sicilia by Autolycus. Now back in Sicilia, Leontes is still mourning. Paulina has been telling Leontes that he can't remarry, even though everyone else is telling him he needs to move on since he needs an heir. Florizel and Perdita arrive, and Florizel claims to be on a diplomatic mission from his father, but his cover is blown when Camillo and Polixenes arrive in Sicilia. Now right here, we don't get a full description of the events that happened. Instead, we get an account of what happened from gentlemen of the Sicilian court. They talk about how both kings were so happy to see each other, and Leontes found out that Perdita is his actual daughter, and thus the prophecy has been fulfilled. Since Perdita is in fact a princess, Polixenes allows Florizel to marry Perdita. Leontes has begged Polixenes for forgiveness, and now the two are best friends again. The shepherd and his son are now made gentlemen by the kings and run into Autolycus, who has heard everything and asks them to forgive him. Meanwhile, Polixenes, Perdita, Florizel, Leontes, and Camillo go over to Paulina's house where a statue of Hermione had been recently finished, but it was painted recently, so they can't touch it. Leontes is distraught seeing his wife's form. She also looks a little older than she was when she died. Well, it turns out it is actually Hermione restored to life. Perdita and Florizel are engaged by the end of the play, and everyone is celebrating the miracle. Also, since Paulina has done a good favor to Leontes, he decides to do a good favor for her, and encourages her to marry Camillo. That's where the play ends. Now, I want to address one thing that has been debated for years. Did Hermione magically come back to life, or was Paulina hiding Hermione in her house the whole time until the prophecy was fulfilled? I think the latter option is more likely, but it's perfectly fine to believe that maybe magic was involved. Magic may have been involved since Leontes insists on seeing the bodies of Mamilius and Hermione so they can be buried together. The world may never know what really happened, since the author has been dead for hundreds of years. Anyway, since this play is a comedy, it does have the classic theme of restoring order. However, in this case, not all order is restored since Antigonus is dead and so is Mamilius, who died unfairly since the sickness he died from was a wasting sickness that happened while his mother was being accused. That's the one thing that's not really resolved, which is probably what contributed to this being a problem play. Okay, let's talk about Leontes. He was so caught up in his idea that his wife and his best friend were seeing each other that he believed the oracle from Delphos was wrong. I wonder how many people in the audience laughed at that absurdity, since who would say the all-seeing oracle was wrong? It's very possible to be so caught up in what you believe happened that you fail to see what really happened. This is a theme I've seen in other works as well. Now, I think it's interesting that Shakespeare chose to have the audience receive secondhand accounts from some of the events that happened in the play from the lords of the Sicilian court, because he very easily could have had the actors act out the whole reunion scene, or had Leontes and Polixenes imply that they've been best friends forever. It's probably an example of the time of how people in the court talk about things that have been going on, and the news likely spreads to the people. This isn't the first time Shakespeare wrote something like this in his plays, either. It's really fascinating. Overall, this is a fun play. While it does start off a horrible tragedy, everything gets better in the happy ending. It is a huge emotional roller coaster if you have no idea what's going on. I'd recommend this for ages 15 and up since the language is a little hard to understand. This is one play that I'd love to see on stage, and as far as I know, there's only 3 film adaptations, which is kind of sad because I think this would be the most fun to put on film. I can see why not, though, since you wouldn't be able to read the famous "Exit Pursued by a Bear" stage direction. Well, that was a crazy ride. I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about another fun Shakespeare comedy. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone, and happy reading!